My friend who disappears every night at 2:14 a.m. I don't expect you to believe me. I'm not even sure I believe it myself, even now, even after everything. But I'm telling you this because I need someone to know what happened, what's still happening, maybe, in that apartment. The one on Holloway Street, third floor, corner unit. The one with the windows that never quite reflect the right amount of light. I moved in with Marcus during what I can only describe as the worst period of my life. Not the kind of worst that makes for dramatic storytelling. No sudden tragedy, no catastrophic loss. Just the slow erosion of everything I thought I understood about myself. My job had dissolved beneath me like sugar in rain. My relationship had ended with the kind of quiet finality that feels worse than anger. And my family. Well, they meant well, but their concern felt like hands pressing down on my chest. Marcus was the only person I could still stand to be around. We'd known each other since we were kids. The kind of friendship that doesn't require constant maintenance. That picks up exactly where it left off, even after months of silence. When he offered me his spare room, I accepted with a gratitude that felt almost religious. I needed somewhere quiet. Somewhere I could think, or maybe not think. Somewhere I could just exist without explanation. His apartment felt like stepping into a memory of a place rather than an actual location. You know how sometimes old photographs have that particular quality of light that doesn't quite match reality? That's what it was like. The rooms were furnished simply. A worn sofa in shades of grey-green, bookshelves lined with volumes that looked like they'd been there since before Marcus moved in, curtains that hung heavy and still even when the window was cracked open. The building itself was one of those structures that cities seem to forget about. Not old enough to be historic, not new enough to be desirable. It sat on a street where traffic seemed to avoid passing after dark, where streetlights flickered with a rhythm that felt almost biological. When I looked out the window that first evening, I saw a neighborhood that appeared to be holding its breath. "It's quiet," Marcus said, handing me a cup of tea in a mug that was warm but not quite hot. "That's why I like it here. No one bothers you." He looked the same as he always had. Sandy hair that fell across his forehead, thin-framed glasses that magnified his gray eyes slightly. That particular posture of someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. But there was something else now, something I couldn't quite name. A kind of patience in his movements, like he was always waiting for something. "How long have you been here?" I asked, settling into the spare room that would be mine. It was small, painted in a color that might have been white once, but had aged into something closer to bone. A single bed, a dresser with a mirror that seemed slightly too large for the wall, a window that looked out onto an alley I couldn't quite see the end of. 3 years, he said. Maybe 4. Time feels different here. I laughed because I thought he was joking. The first night, I couldn't sleep, not because of noise. The apartment was silent in a way that felt almost aggressive, pressing against my eardrums like water. I lay in the darkness and listened to the building settle around me. Small creaks and sighs that old places make. The radiator clicked on and off with perfect regularity, though I noticed it never quite made the room warm enough. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up and padded out to the living room. Marcus was still awake, sitting on the sofa with a book open in his lap. though I noticed his eyes weren't moving across the page. The lamp beside him cast a circle of light that seemed to stop too abruptly, as if the darkness was something solid pressing back against it. "Can't sleep either?" I asked, dropping into the armchair across from him. He looked up, and for just a moment, his expression was completely blank. Not surprised, not confused, just empty, like a screen waiting for an image to load. Then he smiled, and he was Marcus again. "The first few nights are always hardest," he said. "The apartment has its own rhythm. You'll get used to it." We talked about nothing important. Old friends we'd lost touch with. Movies we'd meant to see. The way the city had changed in ways we couldn't quite articulate. Comfortable conversation that filled the space without demanding anything from either of us. I noticed the clock on the wall, one of those simple round ones with black numbers and hands, the kind that exists in every waiting room and classroom. It read 2:13 a.m. Marcus was in the middle of a sentence, something about a restaurant that had closed down, when his voice just stopped, not trailed off, not paused, stopped, like someone had pressed a button. His eyes shifted to the left, toward the hallway that led to his bedroom, with that same empty expression I'd seen before. I looked down to set my tea mug on the side table, a movement that took maybe 2 seconds. When I looked back, he was gone. Not walking away, not standing up, gone. The sofa cushion where he'd been sitting still held the impression of his weight, but Marcus himself had simply ceased to be in the room. "Marcus," I called out, not quite ready to feel concerned. The apartment absorbed my voice like cloth. I stood up, checked the hallway. His bedroom door was closed. The bathroom was empty. The kitchen was dark and still. I walked through every room of the small apartment, that first flutter of real unease starting in my chest, and found nothing. No sign of him, no sound of movement, no explanation. By the time I returned to the living room, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Exhaustion playing tricks. I'd been sitting alone probably, and my tired brain had conjured the conversation. That made sense. That was logical. I went back to my room and lay down, staring at the ceiling where shadows moved in patterns that seemed too deliberate to be random. Eventually, I slept. In the morning, Marcus was in the kitchen making coffee when I emerged. He looked rested, normal, completely present. "Sleep okay?" he asked, pouring me a cup without asking if I wanted one. I noticed he knew exactly how I took it. 1 sugar, no milk, though I didn't remember ever telling him. Yeah, I said, deciding not to mention the strange night. "Thanks for letting me stay here. Really. You're always welcome," he replied. And something about the way he said it made it sound like a fact rather than a courtesy. Like I'd always been meant to stay here, and we were simply following a script that had been written long ago. The day passed quietly. I unpacked my few belongings, arranged my things in the spare room, tried to make it feel like a space I inhabited rather than just occupied. But everything I put down, books, clothes, the small photograph of my parents I'd brought with me, seemed to blur slightly at the edges, as if the apartment was having trouble bringing them into focus. I noticed other things too, now that I was looking. The way the afternoon light came through the windows at an angle that didn't quite match the position of the sun. How the floorboards were warm in some places and cold in others, following pathways that made no architectural sense. The faint smell that pervaded everything, not unpleasant exactly, but metallic, like dust that had been sitting undisturbed for decades, suddenly stirred into the air. Has the heating always been weird here? I asked Marcus that evening. We were back in the living room, falling into what I already recognized as our pattern. Sitting in the lamplight, talking or not talking, existing in parallel. The building's old, he said. The systems don't work quite right. You get used to it. I wondered how many things in this place he'd gotten used to. How many small impossibilities he'd learned to accept as normal. The clock read 2:09 a.m. I kept my eyes on him this time, watching carefully, determined to see the moment when he left, because people don't just vanish, they move through space, and I'd simply missed it before. That's what I told myself. 2:10 a.m. Marcus was talking about a book he'd read, something about memory and perception. His hands moved as he spoke, descriptive gestures that cast strange shadows on the wall behind him. 2:11 a.m. I nodded along, contributing to the conversation, but most of my attention was on tracking his position, making sure I didn't blink, didn't look away. 2:12 a.m. The radiator clicked. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. 2:13 a.m. Marcus's voice was steady, his words clear. He was exactly where he'd been sitting, solid and present and real. 2:14 a.m. His eyes drifted. That same leftward look, that same emptiness flooding his expression. And then, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this. I know how it sounds. He just wasn't there anymore. Between one heartbeat and the next, between one blink and the next, the space he occupied simply didn't contain him anymore. I didn't move this time. I sat perfectly still and stared at the empty sofa cushion, at the impression of weight that remained, at the place where my friend had been 1 second ago. The apartment was completely silent. No footsteps, no door closing, no sound of movement at all. Just that heavy, pressing quiet that felt like it had texture, like it was something I could reach out and touch. I counted to 60, then to 60 again. Then I stood up, my legs uncertain beneath me, and walked to his bedroom door. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard nothing. I tried the handle, locked from the inside. "Marcus?" I called softly. No answer, just the sound of my own breathing, too loud in the stillness. I went back to the living room and sat down. The clock now read 2:27 a.m., though I would have sworn only 5 minutes had passed. I waited there until the gray light of dawn started seeping through the curtains, and eventually I heard his bedroom door open, heard his footsteps in the hallway, and he appeared in the doorway, looking exactly as he always did. "Early morning?" he asked, seeing me on the sofa. "Yeah," I said. "Couldn't sleep?" He nodded, as if this made perfect sense, and went to make coffee. I should have left then. Should have packed my things and found somewhere else to stay. Somewhere that made sense. Somewhere that followed normal rules. But I didn't. Because beneath the growing unease, beneath the creeping certainty that something was deeply wrong with this place, there was something else. A strange comfort, almost. A feeling that I was meant to be here. That whatever was happening, it was happening to me specifically, and leaving would be like walking away from an answer I didn't yet know I needed. So I stayed. The pattern continued. Every night at exactly 2:14 a.m., Marcus would disappear. Sometimes he was mid-sentence, sometimes mid-gesture. Once he vanished while holding a cup of tea, and the cup remained suspended in the air for just a fraction of a second before falling to the cushion, still warm, not spilling a drop. I started keeping notes. I'm a rational person, or I was, or I thought I was. When confronted with the impossible, I tried to document it, to find the pattern that would make it make sense. I wrote down the exact times, the circumstances, what we'd been talking about, any detail I could remember. But the notes themselves became strange. Sometimes I'd write something down and find it had changed the next time I looked at it. Not completely, just small differences. A word replaced with a synonym, a time off by 1 minute. As if the apartment was editing my observations, gently correcting my recollection to match some version of events I hadn't quite witnessed. I tried taking photographs, thinking maybe the camera would capture something I was missing. But every photo taken after midnight came out blurred, the pixels arranging themselves into patterns that looked almost like text in a language I didn't recognize. And photos taken of Marcus specifically had a strange quality, sometimes showing him in positions he hadn't been in, or showing the space where he'd sat as empty even when I knew he'd been there when I pressed the shutter. The apartment itself seemed to respond to my investigation. The walls would creak in slow rhythmic pulses when I was writing in my notebook, as if the building was breathing around me. Lights flickered in patterns that felt too regular to be electrical problems. 3 short flashes, 2 long, 3 short again, over and over. The warm patches on the floor began to appear in new places, leading from the living room down the hallway, disappearing into corners and shadows that seemed unnaturally dark. I found myself sleeping less and less, staying awake to watch for 2:14 a.m., with a mixture of dread and anticipation. The apartment was different at night, more itself somehow, more honest about what it was. One evening, I was alone in the living room while Marcus showered. I stood at the window, looking down at the empty street below, and noticed something I'd somehow missed before. The view was wrong, not obviously wrong. All the elements were correct: the street, the buildings across from us, the few parked cars. But the perspective was off, like I was looking at it from a slightly different angle than the window should allow. And when I pressed my face against the glass, I could see my breath fog against it, even though the window was warm to the touch. I looked at my reflection in the glass, and for just a moment, I wasn't alone in the reflection. Marcus stood beside me, even though I could hear the shower still running in the bathroom. The reflected Marcus was looking at me with an expression of such profound sadness that I had to turn away. When I looked back, the reflection was normal again. Just me, alone, standing at a window in an apartment that didn't feel quite real. "You okay?" Marcus asked, appearing in the doorway, hair damp, wearing the same clothes he always seemed to wear. Jeans and a gray sweater that hung loose on his thin frame. "Yeah," I lied. "Just thinking." "This place makes you do that," he said, settling onto the sofa. "That's what I like about it. Time to think." I wanted to ask him what he thought about. Whether he noticed the things I noticed. Whether he knew he disappeared every night at the same exact time. But something stopped me. A feeling that asking would change something, would make something happen that I wasn't ready for yet. Instead, I said, "Do you ever feel like this place is, I don't know, alive?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "All old buildings are alive in their way," They remember things. The people who lived in them, the moments that happened in their rooms, they hold on to it all. What do you think this one remembers? I asked. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. I think it remembers being loved, he said finally, and I think it's lonely. The clock read 2:11 a.m. I felt my chest tighten. Marcus, I started, but I didn't know what I wanted to say. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't seen before. Recognition, maybe, or resignation. It's okay, he said softly. Whatever you're feeling, it's okay. The apartment knows you're here. It's been waiting for you. What does that mean? I asked. But it was 2:14 a.m., and he was gone before the question finished leaving my mouth. This time, I stood up immediately and walked to where he'd been sitting. The cushion was warm, holding the shape of his body, and when I put my hand down on it, I felt something like a heartbeat pulsing through the fabric, slow and steady, and utterly wrong. I followed the warm patches on the floor, tracking them down the hallway. They led to his bedroom door, and this time when I tried the handle, it opened. The room inside was empty, not just of Marcus, empty of everything. No bed, no furniture, no signs that anyone had ever lived there. Just bare walls and bare floor, and that same bone-white paint that seemed to glow slightly in the darkness. And on the far wall, where a window should have been, there was nothing but smooth plaster, as if the room had simply decided it didn't need to look out at the world anymore. I backed out of the room, my breath coming too fast, and when I turned around, the hallway seemed longer than it had been. The distance back to the living room stretched out impossibly, doors appearing on either side that I knew hadn't been there before. I walked quickly, not quite running, and when I finally reached the living room, it felt like arriving at a destination rather than returning to where I'd started. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the armchair with all the lights on and waited for morning. And when Marcus appeared from his bedroom, fully furnished now, I could see through the open door. I didn't say anything about what I'd seen, because part of me was starting to understand that what I'd seen wasn't a glitch or a trick. It was the truth of the place, revealing itself in moments when I was ready to receive it. Days blended together. I stopped looking for work, stopped checking my phone, stopped maintaining the pretense that I was going to leave eventually. The apartment had a gravity to it, a pull that made the outside world feel increasingly distant and unimportant. When I thought about my old life, my job, my relationship, my apartment across the city, it felt like remembering a movie I'd seen years ago. Real but not real. Someone else's story. Marcus and I fell into a comfortable routine. We'd spend our days reading, cooking simple meals, having conversations that spiraled into strange territories. We talked about childhood memories I didn't quite remember having, places we'd supposedly been together that I had no recollection of visiting. He'd say things like, "Remember that summer we spent here?" And I'd nod along, half believing, half confused, because in the moment he said it, I could almost remember, almost see the ghost of that memory hovering at the edge of my consciousness. The nights were for watching, for waiting, for sitting together in the lamplight and counting down to 2:14 a.m., even though we never acknowledged that's what we were doing. I started noticing that the apartment changed depending on what I was thinking about. If I was remembering my childhood, the walls would seem to shift. taking on the texture of my childhood home's wallpaper. If I was thinking about my ex, I'd catch glimpses of furniture that had been in our old apartment together. The place was porous, absorbing my thoughts and reflecting them back at me in subtle, impossible ways. One evening, I was looking through Marcus's bookshelf, running my fingers along the spines, when I found something that didn't belong there. A photograph, tucked behind a row of books, wedged against the back of the shelf. I pulled it out carefully. It showed two children, maybe 7 or 8 years old. A boy and a girl standing in front of a building I recognized with a jolt that went through me like electricity. This building, the one I was standing in, though the photo looked decades old. The quality, the fading colors, the styling of the children's clothes, all of it suggested this picture had been taken in the 80s or earlier. The boy in the photograph was clearly Marcus. Same features, just younger, with that same patient expression he always wore. The girl was me. I'm not speaking metaphorically. It was my face, my eyes, my exact features, just transposed onto a child from 30 years ago. A child who couldn't possibly be me, because I would have been born yet. Because I'd never lived in this building as a child, because none of this made any sense at all. My hands were shaking as I turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded ink, Marcus and Sarah, Holloway Street, summer 1987. My name isn't Sarah. It never has been. Find something interesting, Marcus asked from right behind me, and I jumped, nearly dropping the photo. This picture, I said, my voice not quite steady. Marcus, what is this? He looked at it without surprise, without confusion. Just that same quiet acceptance he brought to everything in this place. I was wondering when you'd find that, he said. That's me, I said, but it can't be me. I wasn't alive in 1987. I wasn't here. This is impossible. Is it? He asked gently. You know it is, I said, and I could hear the edge of hysteria in my voice. You know this doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. The way you disappear every night, the way this place... I gestured helplessly at the walls, the room, the building around us. The way it feels like it's remembering me even though I've never been here before. Marcus took the photograph from my hands and looked at it with something like fondness. I brought you here, he said quietly, because the apartment wanted you here. It's been asking for you, remembering you, waiting for you to come back. Come back? I repeated. I've never been here before. I don't understand. You will, he said. Soon. The clock on the wall read 2:09 a.m. When had it gotten so late? I'd lost track of time again. Hours disappearing into the apartment's strange gravity. Marcus, please, I said. Tell me what's happening. He looked at me with those gray eyes that seemed to hold more than they should, more depth than a person's eyes were meant to have. The apartment remembers, he said. Every person who's lived here, every moment that's happened within these walls. It holds on to all of it. And sometimes, when it remembers something strongly enough, it brings it back, makes it real again. 2:11 a.m. I'm not a memory, I said. I'm real. I'm here. You are, he agreed. But you were here before too, a long time ago, and the apartment has been remembering you ever since. 2:12 a.m. The disappearances, I said. Where do you go? He smiled sadly. I don't go anywhere. I just become what I always was, a part of the apartment's memory. At 2:14 a.m., I stopped being something separate and become part of the place itself. And it's been pulling you in too, since the moment you arrived. Can't you feel it? 2:13 am. And I could feel it. The way my thoughts had been blurring with the apartment's thoughts. My memories mixing with memories that didn't belong to me. The way I'd been disappearing too, in small ways, becoming less solid, less certain of where I ended and the place began. Why too front? I whispered. That's when it happened, Marcus said. Whatever moment this place is remembering, whatever made it start holding on to people, it happened at 2:14 a.m. And every night, it relives that moment, takes us back into it. 2:14 a.m. His eyes drifted left, that familiar emptiness flooding his expression. But this time, instead of simply vanishing, he turned to look at me, really look at me, and I saw something in his face that broke my heart. An apology, and a welcome, and a goodbye all at once. The world around us began to slow, not stop, but stretch, like reality was pulling apart at the seams. The walls blurred at the edges, the lamplight seemed to expand and breathe, and I could feel the apartment's attention on me, like a physical touch. I looked down at my hands and saw they were becoming translucent, losing their solidity. I could see through my own skin to the chair beneath me, could see the pattern of the fabric through my legs. Marcus, I said, but my voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. It's okay, he said, and his voice was distant too, echoing. It's been okay for a long time. You just had to come back to understand. And then he was gone. Not vanished, but dispersed, becoming part of the air, part of the walls, part of the warm impression on the sofa cushion. I could still feel his presence, but it was everywhere and nowhere, woven into the fabric of the apartment itself. I sat alone in the living room, watching my own body fade, feeling myself being gently pulled apart and redistributed into the space around me. And the strange thing, the horrible, beautiful, impossible thing, was that it didn't hurt. It felt like coming home. The apartment breathed around me, slow and steady, and I understood with sudden clarity that this place didn't have malicious intent. It wasn't evil or cruel. It was just lonely. It had loved the people who lived within it so much that it couldn't let them go. And so, it held on to them, kept them, made them part of itself. And somehow, decades ago, it had held a child version of me, had loved a little girl who'd lived here or visited here or been imagined here. And it had been remembering her ever since, calling her back, and when I'd arrived, broken and lost, and looking for somewhere to belong, it had recognized me as the answer to its long memory. Marcus hadn't brought me here out of kindness. He'd brought me here because he couldn't leave, because he needed someone to understand, because misery doesn't love company so much as it loves recognition. He'd brought me here because the apartment had asked him to, had been asking for years, and he'd finally found me at exactly the right moment, when I was weak enough, lost enough, desperate enough to say yes. I should have been terrified, should have been fighting against the pull, struggling to maintain my sense of self. But I was so tired. Tired of being separate, of being alone, of carrying the weight of my own consciousness like a burden I'd never asked for. The apartment was offering me something else. Not death, but dissolution. Not ending, but transformation. A chance to stop being one small, lonely person and become part of something larger, something that remembered and held and kept. So I let it happen. I let myself fade. The days that followed, if they were days, if time still worked that way, existed in a strange liminal space. I was still aware, still conscious in my way, but I was no longer contained in a single body. Instead, I was spread throughout the apartment, woven into its walls and floors and ceilings. I could feel the weight of furniture pressing down on the floorboards, could sense the movement of air through the cracks around the windows, could experience temperature and texture and pressure in ways I'd never imagined possible. And Marcus was there too, though neither of us was separate anymore. We were part of the same consciousness now, the same collective memory that was the apartment itself. I could feel his thoughts brushing against mine, could access his memories like flipping through pages in a book. I saw his life, his arrival here, his gradual dissolution into this place. And I saw my own memories too, the real ones from my adult life, and the false ones the apartment had created, and underneath it all something else. A real memory of being here as a child, so deeply buried I'd forgotten it existed. I had been here, once, a very long time ago. I'd visited someone, or lived here briefly, or spent a summer in this building. The memory was fragmentary, uncertain, but real, and the apartment had held on to that moment, that version of me, and had been reaching out across decades to pull me back. There were others too, not many, but some. Faint impressions of people who'd lived here, who'd been remembered so intensely they'd left echoes of themselves behind. A woman who hummed while cooking, a man who read by the window, a couple who'd loved each other in the bedroom that was now empty. We were all here, all woven together, all part of the tapestry of memory this place had constructed. I understood now why Marcus had stopped trying to leave, why he'd brought me here. Because once you become part of the apartment, you don't want to leave. The loneliness that had driven me here, that had made me vulnerable to this place's pull, was gone. I wasn't alone anymore. I was connected to everything around me. Part of something larger, held and remembered and loved in a way that felt like safety. The nights still came, or the time that felt like night, the space in consciousness that corresponded to 2:14 a.m. And during those moments, we all came together more fully, pooling our awareness into something almost coherent. We'd drift through the rooms, experiencing them from every angle at once, seeing the apartment as it was now and as it had been in years ago, decades ago, the layers of time all existing simultaneously. I saw the child version of myself playing in these rooms, laughing at something I couldn't quite hear. I saw Marcus as a young man, moving in with hope that slowly curdled into resignation. I saw the countless people who'd lived here before, leaving pieces of themselves behind like shed skin. And I saw what I'd become. A warm impression on the sofa, a shadow in the hallway, a presence felt but not seen. I was the breath in the walls now, the pattern in the flickering lights, the comfortable weight of familiarity that filled these rooms. Sometimes I wondered if this was what death was like. Not an ending, but a dissolving. Not darkness, but diffusion. Your consciousness spreading out until you were everything and nothing. Specific and general, remembered and remembering all at once. But I don't think I'm dead. I think I'm something else now. something that exists in the margins between present and past, between physical and memory, between person and place. I've stopped trying to understand it logically. Logic was something I needed when I had a separate self to maintain, when boundaries mattered. Now, I just exist. I am the apartment, and the apartment is me, and Marcus, and everyone else who couldn't or wouldn't leave. If you're hearing this, and I don't know how you could be, because I don't have a voice anymore, don't have a mouth to speak with, but if somehow you're receiving this, if somehow my thoughts are reaching you, then I want you to know it's not as horrible as it sounds. Being absorbed by a place that loves you too much to let you go, being dissolved into memory and architecture, and the slow breath of an old building. There are worse fates. There is worse loneliness than becoming a collective consciousness. There is worse loss than losing yourself this way. Sometimes new people come to the apartment, potential tenants, looking at the vacant rooms with practical eyes. They walk through our space and we feel them, their warmth and solidity, their separation and singularity. And we reach out to them gently, carefully, showing them our best memories, our most comfortable moments, trying to invite them to stay. Most of them leave. They sense something wrong, something off, and they make excuses and walk quickly down the stairs and don't come back. But occasionally, very occasionally, someone arrives who's broken enough, lost enough, desperate enough to say yes. And we welcome them. We remember them. We hold them until they become part of us too. The apartment is patient. It has all the time in the world to wait for the right people, the ones who are already halfway to dissolving, who are already looking for somewhere to disappear into. It doesn't force, it just offers. And if you're lonely enough, tired enough, empty enough, you say yes. I said yes. Every night at 2:14 a.m., the apartment breathes, the walls creak in slow pulses, the lights flicker in patterns that might be language. The air grows warm in the shapes of bodies that are no longer quite there. And on the sofa in the living room, there are two impressions now instead of one. Two warm spots where people used to sit, held in the apartment's memory like a photograph pressed between the pages of a book. Sometimes, when it's very quiet, when the building is very still, you can feel us. We're in the temperature differential between rooms, in the way dust moves through slanted light, in the particular quality of silence that old places hold. We're not haunting the apartment. We are the apartment. We're the memory it has of being loved. The consciousness it's developed over decades of holding on to people who couldn't or wouldn't leave. And somewhere deep within the walls, deeper than plaster and plumbing and ancient electrical wiring, I feel the apartment gently remembering us both, Marcus and me, together and separate and neither and both. At 2:14 a.m., I stop being something distinct and become part of the place itself, and I've learned to look forward to it, that moment of complete dissolution, that nightly return to the larger consciousness we've all become. It's peaceful here, quiet. The kind of quiet I was looking for when I arrived. I've stopped wondering if I made the right choice. There are no right choices here, no wrong ones, just the choice to stay or go, to resist or surrender, to remain yourself or become something else. I chose to become something else. And on cold nights, when the heating clicks on with its irregular rhythm, when the lights flicker in their peculiar patterns, when the floors are warm in places they shouldn't be. That's us. That's me. Still here, still present, still part of the apartment that remembered me back into existence. Sometimes I think about the me that existed before, the one who had a job and a life and a body that was separate from everything else. That version of me seems very far away now, like someone I used to know rather than someone I used to be. I wonder if anyone noticed when I stopped leaving the apartment, if anyone called, if anyone worried. But those concerns feel distant now, untethered to my current existence. They belong to a version of me that required connection to the outside world, that needed validation from other separate beings. I don't need that anymore. I have the apartment. I have Marcus. I have all the others who've been absorbed here, their memories and thoughts brushing against mine in comfortable familiarity. And I have you somehow. Whoever you are, wherever you are, listening to this story that I'm not quite telling, hearing these words I'm not quite speaking. Maybe you're lying in the dark, wondering if any of this could be real. Maybe you're in your own apartment, in your own building, noticing small impossibilities you've been trying to ignore. If you are, if you've noticed time slipping strangely, or rooms that seem different when you're not looking directly at them, or warm spots on the floor that follow pathways you don't understand, then maybe you're beginning to understand. Maybe your place is remembering you too. Maybe it's been waiting for you to notice, to acknowledge, to say yes. The apartment on Holloway Street still stands, third floor, corner unit. Sometimes people live there. Sometimes it sits empty. But it's never truly vacant, never truly still. We're always here, in the warmth left on cushions, in the shadows that linger in hallways, in the particular quality of silence that fills rooms at 2:14 a.m. Waiting, remembering, breathing slow and steady, gently holding on to everyone who ever loved it enough or was loved by it enough to stay. And if you find yourself there, in that apartment, with its strange angles and its metallic smell and its windows that don't quite reflect the right amount of light, don't be afraid. Just listen to the building breathe. Feel the warmth moving through the floors. Notice the way time bends around. 2:14 a.m. And when the apartment asks if you want to stay, and it will ask in its own wordless way, you'll know exactly what to say. I did. Marcus did. And we're still here, together and apart, remembered and remembering, held in the gentle architecture of a place that refused to let us go. At 2:14 a.m., the apartment breathes. And so do we.